Emotions of grief are difficult enough. When rival emotions like joy, happiness come along with misery and sorrow, that ping pong feeling can be very taxing for us as grievers. Lisa Kefauver is with us to open this up this evening. And Lisa, we're grateful to have you. I know you've had some difficult, conflicting experiences in your life, and they've led you into
For
a
sure.
life that you hadn't exactly expected as a grief activist, a podcaster, and an author. So we're
Yeah.
really grateful to have you here with us this afternoon on Journeys Through Grief. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. As you know, this is my favorite topic. So I'm so grateful to be here and to dive into a conversation today. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. People experience a wide variety
Yeah.
of emotions when they're grieving. And as I said, happiness and joy, you can have those one moment or feel like you should in some time with something going on. And they'll be alongside this sense of sadness and anger and difficulty and all. And that can put you in a really weird place. You don't know which one's right and what's appropriate and
Yeah.
things as a grieving person. First off, how can that be? And what can people do with that?
Yeah. I love this conversation around our emotional agility is one way to think about it. How do
Yeah,
we hold our emotions? A couple things come to mind as you ask me that question. I think I want to start with something I find myself saying so often to clients and in talks, certainly on my show, is that one of the things that I do in my work, why I'm an activist, is I think culturally, and everything I think about and talk about in our grief, I promise I'm going to get to answering the emotions question, is in the context of our culture, and we're coming
sure.
to you from the Western culture,
Right.
modern, capitalistic, the whole thing is we've assigned value to emotions.
Yes.
Some emotions are good and
Hmm.
some emotions are bad. And I call BS on that. Emotions are not good or bad.
Right.
They're actually literally a neural impulse that invites us to move, and they move through us in, let's say, 60 to 30 seconds. One of the chapters in my books is like emotions, feelings, and moods. Oh my. It's like emotion is the thing you have no control over. It comes up. Feelings is kind of when you add a little story to the data, to the raw data.
Okay. Okay.
And then moods are when the data, the stories take hold. That's sort of how I think about thinking about emotions, feelings, and moods, not to get too nerdy. So I think I start for myself, when I feel conflicting emotions, and by the way, it's taken me a long time to get here for myself,
Sure. Yeah.
is to
Yeah.
start with any inner narrator, and I heard you use the word should. So I invite people to first be a should detective because we
Yeah.
all should all over ourselves. I promise I'm not swearing when I say that. We should all over ourselves. Um, for when an emotion arises, first of all, having emotional granularity. What actually is this emotion? Am I just calling it sad? But maybe it's jealousy, or maybe it's longing, or maybe it's homesickness. Like, get granular. Two, listen out for the judgment. I shouldn't
Mm.
feel this way. I should feel this way. And then take a really like distant, kind, sort of compassionate perspective lens. Like, this is just the way I'm feeling. I don't need to label it good or
Right.
bad, should or shouldn't. Um, and we're complicated creatures with complex relationships sitting in complex systems. So, of course, we're going to have the both and of multiple emotions. So, coming back around, I promise, I think to your earlier question, like, why does it come up? That's because that's the nature of
Right.
we are existing in a time we don't get to choose our emotions a la carte, although I know we would love to. But our emotions bubble up and they need our attention. And
Right.
actually, what happens is when we keep ignoring them, they keep knocking at the door or they come out sideways. So they bubble up because we are experiencing or understanding the circumstances in front of us through multiple lenses because we have multiple perspectives and multiple relationships. I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. A couple years ago, my brother finally got married. He's an older brother, got married later in life. And I was his, I don't know, I walked with him, bridesmaid,
Okay. Sure.
groomsman.
Yeah.
I was the
You
groomswoman.
stood with him.
I
You,
stood with him. I was the groomswoman. And it was, in a beautiful place, in a state where I used to live with my late husband. And I was so happy for him and so happy for his bride. And I'm, standing with a dress, I'm looking in the mountains and I'm just beaming with pride and so much joy and so much happiness. And also simultaneously bawling my eyes out because Eric wasn't there
Right.
to walk me down the aisle, to be with me, to celebrate this day with me. So there was this profound sadness right alongside the profound joy, happiness, delight I felt for my
Right.
brother, for his family, the fact that I got to be there and witness it. Thankfully, if that similar things happened earlier in my grief and I judged myself and I shut it down and I tried
Yeah.
to pretend it didn't happen. But because that had come along further down the road, I just sort of like people walked up to me as I'm bawling and are you okay? And I was like, yep, I'm sad and happy. Like this is this is what it means to be human. I'm just going for the ride. It looks
Yep.
crazy, but I promise it's not.
Right.
So I hope, I'm going to pause. I hope that answers your question. I just think it's so important to normalize it. And the more that
Yep.
we should on ourselves, the more that we try to correct it. I say don't should, be curious. Like,
Great. Oh, that's nice.
why is it arising? Is
Mm-hmm.
is the feeling arising because there are facts on the ground that are really eliciting this thing? Maybe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed an opportunity. I didn't get the job, or my friend passed away, or my brother got married and but my husband's not here. Whatever the thing is. But if we get curious to the emotion, we can just, because emotions can be, even though I just said emotions aren't good or bad, I want to say emotions or feelings can be liars.
Oh, that's nice. Mm.
Meaning we can have an emotion of jealousy or rage or, anger or sorrow, but sometimes that's based on a story we're telling ourselves about the environment or the circumstance, not on what's actually happening.
Okay.
So we can feel jealousy and rage. And so I want us to be curious, the fact like, oh, I'm feeling jealousy, let's say, I'm just going to pick that emotion.
Yeah.
But if we get curious, instead of writing it to its inevitable, I don't know, we're going to key somebody's car,
Yeah.
or the shut it down, I shouldn't be jealous.
Mm-hmm.
If we get curious, we're like, where's this jealousy coming from? Did somebody say they could have something and I couldn't have it? Or is that an assumption that I'm making? What is the story I'm telling myself?
Right.
And that's where I say I think sometimes emotions can come alongside lies. So we have to be curious because sometimes emotions are an indicator that we're making an assumption about something, somebody's opinion, the way they feel about us, the opportunity that we think the door closed on the opportunity that isn't necessarily based on fact. So if we can get curious, why am I feeling jealous right now? What
Right.
is that about? What story is floating through my head that's, is it valid? Maybe it is. I mean, maybe you're going to get curious
Sure.
and it's like, yeah, and then you're going to go with it. But they can come because we're complex. We can reserve our judgment, recognize that all emotions serve a purpose and that they need to be, they are emotions in motion. They need to move through us. And the more
Yeah.
we shut them down because of shame or guilt, or we feel like we shouldn't, like in early grief, the first time I laughed out loud, I felt immediately shameful.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I must not have loved my husband enough if I can somehow be
Right.
laughing. And then we can just tend to that with curiosity, like, oh, that's what came up for me right now. It passed.
Yeah.
But we suffer unnecessarily in the gap between what we feel or what we experience in grief and the stories we tell ourselves
Right.
or culture tells us about what we
Mm-hmm.
should experience. And that gap in between is what causes so much unnecessary suffering. So I
Right.
say, get present to the reality of it, be curious and notice, see if there's stories that you can set down that aren't serving you anymore and see how that shifts your relationship with your emotions. But the more you judge it or the more you wall it off, the more it's just going to keep
Knocking at the
knocking at your
door.
door. I mean, I have a
Yep.
poem that I wrote years ago that ended up in my book called Stop By for a Cup of Coffee, exactly about that, that
Mm.
your emotions are going to keep knocking. All they want to do is come, be seen and held, and they'll be on their way. But the more we keep the blinds closed and the door shut, the more they're going to be, you know, knocking on your door. It's going to come out in stress,
Yep.
physical symptomatology, maybe behaviors that don't align with your values, treating people in ways, I'm thinking about like passive aggressiveness,
Uh-huh.
right? So do yourself and everybody around you a favor and welcome them in with a lot of deep compassion and grace.
Yeah.
They are temporary visitors.
Yeah.
I I promise.
Yep.
Last thing I'm going to say on this about emotions, although I imagine we'll talk more. Another thing to think about is no emotion in the history of your life. I'm 54 now. I just turned 54. I have never had an emotion come and stay.
Yep.
Not one, dang it. Because there's definitely been some times where I felt a lot of bliss or a lot of pride, and boy, it would have been nice for that to hang around,
Just hang
Just like
on
I'm
to
gonna
it
hang
and
on
keep
to
it.
it.
Yep.
It didn't stay.
No.
Neither did the time where I was gutted and on the floor in excruciating pain of grief or longing or disappointment, or that didn't stay either. No emotion is permanent. So
Yep.
when we start to feel overwhelmed by having one or more, I would call them uncomfortable, they're not good or bad, but one or more uncomfortable emotions, one of the gifts we can say to ourselves is like, I'm not even religious. I don't know if this is a religious phrase, but what came to me is like, this too shall pass.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
which means when you're feeling joyful, by the way, celebrate that.
Celebrate it. Hang on to it for a
And
bit
when it
and ride that
like
wave.
ride the wave, and
Yep.
when it's hard, be tender with it, be tender
Yes.
with yourself, but know too that that emotion will pass as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think if we when I say emotions are liars, sometimes they're liars because especially the hard emotions, shame and jealousy and regret, they can kind of convince us that you've always felt this way and you're always going to feel this way. They
Right.
kind of trick
Mm-hmm.
you into thinking they're permanent, but they're
Right.
not.
Nope.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's be in relationship to our emotions, figure out what they're trying to tell us,
Yep.
and then be on our way. And when you're crying and happy, I call it, I coined this term years ago, smiling. When
Smiling.
you're, it's kind of what I did at that wedding. You're
Sure.
smiling because something beautiful is happening, but crying because the person you love isn't here to
Right there.
experience it with you.
Yeah.
So I call that smiling.
Yeah.
So next time you're smiling, you can just name it like, oh, yep,
There
that's
it
what I'm
is.
doing.
That's
I'm
yep.
smiling. Yeah.
Yep. And the beauty of that, I think, Lisa, is it honors both of those.
Yeah.
One of the times we want to try to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
And again, back to that should sense, right?
Yes.
And I mean, there's so much that I just want to tease out of what you said that I think is really important is the values that we give to these
Yeah.
things, good or bad.
Yeah.
You use the word hard in there. I've heard somebody use the word dark for
Yeah.
some of these things,
Yeah.
dark emotions that
Yeah.
we don't want to deal with, we don't like, and they're
Yeah.
uncomfortable for us and everything.
Yeah.
So they're not negative. Again, they come to teach us they're important parts of
Yeah.
who we are, and to
Yeah.
just allow that to be there. And that idea of a gap that
Yeah.
is between that is really brilliant too, because one of the things I think that I try to encourage people to do is when whatever is going on in their life with their grief is to just pause for a moment.
Yeah.
And if you think about that gap between what your expectations are, what you're having, and what the story is that you've been
Yeah.
given, or the
Yeah.
expectation, or whatever, and use that gap to say, here's my space.
Yeah.
Here's my space where I can look at this and become friendly with it.
Yeah. And
And
not run away with the story,
right,
interrogate the story. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because that takes a lot of energy.
Which is a
The
practice. I mean, that takes, I wrote a poem. It sounds like I write a lot of poetry. I don't, but I happen to write a poem called In the Space Before the Story. And it's exactly that about
yeah,
how you take that pause, because so many of us have programmed stories because our parents told us to
yep.
go to our room when we were angry. So, by the way, of
Mhm.
course, we have a bad relationship with anger because
Sure.
we were rejected or whatever the thing is. And then we
Right.
have these stories about our feelings. So, we
Hmm.
pause, to your point, I think is such a, it seems obvious, but it's such an underutilized skill
Yes.
to just pause and be present before you run away with a story, to see what it's there to teach you, how you feel about it, is there information on then maybe I need to reach out to people. Maybe this is
Right.
telling me my loneliness is telling me I
Hmm.
need to build connections, right? So
Yes.
like there's information there, but if you're so busy trying to stuff it down or get through it, you're going to
Right.
miss what it has to teach you.
Yeah. Yeah. We so often react instead of, kind of pause
Yeah.
to receive what it is
Yeah.
and then to move through it. Rumi, I don't know if you're familiar with the
Yeah.
poet Rumi. He has
Yeah.
a wonderful, wonderful poem that I use a lot called The Guest House. I
Yes.
invite you to look it up.
Yeah. My poem is a similar
Yeah.
idea of that sort of passing visitor. I want to
Yeah.
name too for people listening live or people watching this later on is that I don't want to come off sort of Pollyanna-ish in that there are some emotions that are really hard to hold.
Yes.
They're really hard to hold. So if you can't pause in a Zen-like state and just enjoy and watching like, a leaf floating down the river, but you're heaving and crying and resisting and trying to numb out a little on Netflix and then you're coming back to it or whatever. I just want to name that that's okay too. But the
Yes.
more we can get present to the ones that we struggle to hold, the less hard it's going to be to hold next time it comes. And also, by the way, it might not come back as much.
Right.
Sometimes the reason emotions are coming back over and over again is because you haven't sort of tended to them. So I just
Right.
wanted to name that it's not all butterflies, in the spirit of both and. It's not all butterflies and rainbows like, oh, you have hard feelings, just, you know,
Yeah.
sit cross-legged and just,
Yeah. It's
it's going to
hard.
be ugly and messy
Yep.
and hard and we can do hard things,
Yes, we can.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah,
Because and it comes from this place of love and connectedness.
yeah,
And I think if we trust that as well, that
yeah,
there's a wholeness to that relationship with the person that we are grieving, that brings these
yeah,
myriads of relationship. If we trust that, it will give us a place to be able to process and to
yeah,
experience and to review and view and live through them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for
Beautiful.
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
of course.
Well, so often people like they did with your brother's wedding. They came up, oh, are you okay? And
Yeah,
stuff like that. And they want to support us and they want to
yeah,
support grieving people
yeah,
and everything. But too often, I think they're looking often down much further into that and all. Well, and the language comes out, maybe it's faith-based, what God is testing you, or,
yeah.
you
Doesn't give
know,
you anything
here's,
more than you can handle, or
yeah, and here's a place where you get a chance to grow and really become, somebody new. We know that.
yeah,
That's what grief does. It's the
yeah,
pathway, that's the journey through. It leads us to a new place of who we are and
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
But that's not real helpful.
I
Very.
mean, I've never found it helpful. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but yeah,
Yeah. What would you say to people when it is in particular recent and raw to
yeah.
them? How can they take charge of their grief and respond back to persons? What would you say? What would you offer?
When people say something
Something really
hurtful or
not
yeah.
helpful and painful, those
Well,
kinds of things.
I have lots of thoughts on this. Because it's happened to me. I think maybe we said this off the air, but so my husband was 44, brain tumor, ended up in a coma, and had to take him off life support. And one of his friends came to the hospital to say goodbye, and he looked at me. I was 40, our daughter was 7. Late husband was 44, and he looked at me very seriously and earnestly and said, "Don't worry, Lisa. He's going to be in a better place soon." And that was about him. That was
Yeah,
about acquiescing his pain over losing Eric, but also his fear, I imagine, that somebody his age is dying, and how scary is that?
sure.
So we're going to have it. And this is what I tell grievers all the time, because I won't swear here, but one of the chapters in my book is called People Say Stupid S Word. You can fill in the blank. And I sort of offer 3 options you can do when someone says something hurtful. And I want a disclaimer, most people aren't saying something hurtful
Mhm.
on purpose,
Right.
obviously. They think they're being helpful. Is you can tell them off if you want, you can ignore them, or you can correct them.
Yeah.
And those options are, if it was somebody you don't, and it really in part depends on the relationship.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
if it's a passerby, it's a waiter, it's somebody you're not going to see again, you can ignore maybe because whatever, you don't have a relationship with them. If it's somebody that you've had a relationship with and you've corrected them multiple times and they're still showing up insensitively, then you might choose that option of telling them off. Not that I'm
Hmm.
particularly encouraging that. The third one is educating. And I name this why it's so unfair to the already exhausted, overwhelmed griever that now they have to educate
Yeah. Sure.
the person, but that's what we're left with. So I think when someone says the hurtful thing, one experience or one way to say it is to say to them, "Hey, hey, Susie, I'm just picking a random name out of the hat. I gather that you have good intentions and that you're trying to be helpful, but what you just said is not my experience of how
Yeah.
grief is. And I don't really find that helpful,
Yeah.
right? And if you happen to have a phrase that really soothes you or feels good, you could offer them, like, it really helps me when people say X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I have to say about the things people say, because I just gave a workshop this morning on grief support to a bunch of lawyers, interestingly enough. And, one of the things I say is grief support, meaningful grief support is so much less about what you say and what you do. Meaningful grief support is how you make the griever feel.
Hmm.
And our goals are to make, not to fix the griever.
Nope.
So most of those expressions come up because it's the assumption by the grief supporter that
Yes.
grief is a sign the person is broken and that it's our job to fix them.
Yep.
Grief is a normal response to loss. Nobody's job to fix them. There is no fixing.
Yep.
So instead, our goal when we're showing up to support somebody is to help them feel seen and held and validated
Mhm.
exactly as they are,
Yep.
even if that's curled up in the fetal position saying, I don't know how I'm going to go on living without my child.
Right. Yeah.
You can say, I have some great phrases and phrases I use with friends and family members. I'm holding you in my heart. I'm holding you and your person in
Yep.
my heart. Or affirming, like, I hate that this happened to you. This is unfair. Or you can
Yep.
say, tell me about, if it's later on, maybe tell me about your person. I'd love to hear a favorite memory. Tell
Yeah.
me, that kind of thing. But I think the reason those phrases come out is we're grief illiterate, most of us. We
Hmm.
haven't learned how to talk about grief. Most of us have been taught to, like, don't mention the name, don't go over there. You're going to say the wrong thing. And because we assume the person is broken. So we have to come up
Yeah.
with some witty expression that is somehow going to tie it all up in a neat little bow
Yeah.
and make that person not feel like they don't want to be in this world anymore, or they're just raging at the medical system or
Right.
whatever is the thing that's happening.
Hmm.
So we pause, back to your point.
Hmm.
I say that all the time. Check your energy at the door. Grief support starts before you show up.
Yep.
You pause, you take some good deep breaths, you maybe use some somatic nervous system regulation things to shake your body out. You remind yourself, my job is not to fix this person.
Yeah.
My job is to companion them, to bear witness to them,
Yep.
to hold space for them, to validate however they're feeling, which is probably means you're not even going to have to say a lot. My grief support
Exactly.
motto is show up, shut up, and listen, and then keep
Yep.
showing up.
Yep.
So worry less about what you have to say and focus more on how you want to help them feel that they belong.
Right.
And that's not a lot of words. It's
No.
much more about energy,
Yeah.
much more
Energy
about
and
energy
energy and presence
and
and
presence and
just
like looking them in the eye, even as they're crying and snot is running down their face. You don't have to
yep.
hurry up and offer them a tissue, by the way, to
Yep.
tell them not to cry. You can let the snot run down and then maybe
Yep.
you can say, hey, by the way, there are tissues over here if you need them. And if they can't even sit on the chair because they're wailing and they're on the floor, your job is to get down on the floor
The
and sit
floor
next to
with
them.
them. Yes. Yes.
Metaphorically and sometimes literally. One of the
Right.
most useful things a girlfriend of mine did after my husband died, when I found myself wailing and down on the floor in front of my couch, I couldn't even make it to the couch. She just sat down on the floor next to me. And I'll tell you what, that was one of the most powerful expressions of grief support, more so than
Yep.
any language anybody
Yep.
ever said to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
language of the heart.
It's
And
the
your
yeah,
hearts came together in that
yeah,
You
Yeah.
felt comforted. Which by the way, and this is something I learned and I love.
Yeah.
The word comfort means to bring support, to bring
Yeah.
strength. It
Yeah.
comes from Latin words of
Yeah.
with fort, a fortress.
I
When you
love
bring
that.
comfort to somebody,
Yeah.
you're bringing them a fortress in the midst of their pain and emptiness and
Yeah.
loss and sorrow and all of that it might be.
Yeah.
You're bringing them strength in the midst of that. And it may
Yeah.
be, yep, just sitting on the floor with them
Yeah.
with a hand on a shoulder or
Yeah.
rubbing a back or maybe
Bringing
not
them some
just
food or maybe just sitting there silently.
yep,
Silence is underrated.
underrated
Underrated.
vastly.
Really, our job, in a way, I love that definition. I'm a word nerd too, so I love
Yeah.
learning the origin of words.
Love that word nerd.
Um,
Thanks.
but I think really, when I think about grief support, whether it's the language or the actions or the energy, we're really there to help them carry the weight for a while.
Yep. Hmm. Yep.
And sometimes, by the way, that, I had a friend who, not early on, but because I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, even though I had gone back to work, and I had my 7-year-old who turned 8 shortly after he died. And I had a friend who was always up at night because they were a taxi driver. So they were, driving in the middle of the night. And he would send me memes. And I could
Hmm.
like smile or laugh for a minute. He didn't tell me anything. He wasn't trying to make me laugh. He wasn't
Yep.
trying to make me forget, my deep grief. He was just helping me. He knew I loved humor and memes, and he knew that would help me carry the weight of it for a while when I
Yeah.
couldn't sleep.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be the religious overtone. It doesn't even have to be the
Mm.
profound. You don't have to bring a Rumi quote. You can. If your
Yeah.
person likes poetry, bring them poetry. If your person likes music, bring them music. If your
Yep.
person finds solace and comfort in food, and you happen to be a good cook, cook.
Yep.
If your person likes to walk or needs to walk or said they have, but they are struggling to do it, offer to walk in silence with them.
Yeah.
We overrate the like curative, fixative expression and
Yeah.
underrate the little gestures and small actions
Yeah.
that really help people feel seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're taught to say something because we want to
Yeah.
be fixers, and
Yeah.
that's the best way to do it,
Yeah.
or so we believe.
Yes.
And it's the furthest thing from the truth.
And I'm not saying don't say something. Absolutely
Right.
show up. Do not let your fear of saying the wrong thing keep you from showing up, because
Right.
not showing up is saying something.
Right.
Not
Yep.
showing up is saying, your pain is too difficult for me. I can't relate to you. You're alone. So
Yeah.
show up. You're going to make a mistake. I said
Yep.
this earlier today too to a group, this group that I was talking to. It was like every single one of us has said the wrong thing, the dumb thing, the inappropriate thing,
Mm-hmm.
me included, right?
Yep.
So you just learn and you figure out how to do it better. So say something,
Yeah.
even if the something is, this sucks and I hate that this is happening.
Yeah.
Like, your thing that you say is just affirming whatever it is you are intuiting or hearing them say they feel.
Yeah.
Even if what you say is, I hear you that this feels too hard to handle.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
that's the language they said,
Yep.
mirror that back to them.
Yeah.
That's going to be, I don't know a griever who has not felt supported in that way when somebody
Right.
didn't try to change them in the moment
Right.
or
Mm-hmm.
fix them or correct them,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah,
Just
those are, yeah. So
simply be
educate
there.
your friend. If there's somebody that you know is trying and they're going to be in your life, if it's your family members, if it's friends, if it's coworkers,
Mm-hmm.
then you might choose the education route. You might choose
Right.
the, hey, I have found that is really hurtful. I can imagine if you want to give them a compliment sandwich, you can. You don't have to. You could say something like, I imagine that you're coming from a good place. You don't have to. You don't owe them that. But if you want to, you can. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that actually really offensive or it's really difficult. I prefer it when people don't say something or they say X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Because again, most people they want to show up and they want to say the thing that's helpful. They've never had a friend who's lost a child, or they've
Yeah.
never had a coworker whose, partner died.
Right.
So we're new at this.
Right.
And now we are, because we have shows like Shrinking and some of these other shows that are showing
Mm-hmm.
grief, real grief, Dead to Me, some of those shows. But most of us, nobody modeled to us how
Nope.
to talk to a griever. You know,
Right.
like the widow got widowed. She went away for a while somewhere. George Clooney came along, swept her off her feet, and then voila, she was happy again. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like that's the story we have. So
Yeah.
you're going to mess it up. We're all going to
Yeah.
mess it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's
Let's
okay.
let's let's have some open space and a pause for everybody.
Yeah. We're going to
Yeah.
learn and we're going to do better next time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's all there is. That's a
Yeah.
good thing about being human is we get to keep learning as long as we're breathing.
Yeah. That's great. Lisa, thank you. What
Yeah.
this has been wonderful. You have such a wealth of knowledge and experience and thank you for sharing it so succinctly and beautifully. This is
Oh, I
I'm so
appreciate it.
grateful for you and the advocacy that you're doing for all of us who are grievers. And ultimately that's all of us, you know.
100% of us. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
We're not getting out alive without that. Well, thanks so much for having me and for this conversation. I hope that my answers helped you and helped some
Yeah.
of the folks watching feel a little more equipped to show up for themselves in their own grief and to show up for other
Someone
people
else.
in their grief. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And we want to thank all of our folks watching, be it in real time or sometime in the future. We
Yeah.
hope that you found something helpful and inspirational here and all. So put your thoughts in the chat down there. We'll get back to you and we'll
Yeah.
continue this conversation. I want to also say thanks to Jessica, my colleague, for monitoring the feed and for providing so much to the community at Journeys Through Grief. So
Yeah.
follow us on Facebook and Instagram and be a part of that community so that together we can be in our journey through grief.
Yeah.
We send you grief or send you peace as you
Yeah.
grieve your loss. Take
Thank
care.
you.